All sorts of craziness on the American left, of course, now fully on display. A lot of people waking up to all of this. Last week, you had Elise Stefanik during a congressional hearing, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, challenging a number of presidents at universities, colleges in the United States, very high-profile ones, the presidents of University of Pennsylvania, MIT, and Harvard, all sitting in front of her. And they were asked, hey, would you say it's a violation of your code of conduct if your students call for genocide? And each of them hemmed and hawed. And here's a bit of the University of Pennsylvania president.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If it if the
yes
speech
or
becomes
no?
If the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide?
It's just so crazy, isn't it? All of the college presidents sounded like that. The University of Pennsylvania's Liz McGill did resign over the weekend. You would assume forced out, fired, 4 days after she appeared before Congress and appeared to evade the question of whether students who called for the genocide of Jews should be punished. For more on this, let's bring in Ilya Shapiro. He's a senior fellow and director of constitutional studies at the Manhattan Institute and a former executive director and senior lecturer at the Georgetown Center for the Constitution. Ilya, good to have you back with us, sir.
Good to be with you, Vince. Now, the funny thing is, if you want to be really legalistic, offensive speech, hate speech, vile speech, racial epithets, that is constitutionally protected. The problem is this was not a legal deposition or law school oral exam. And if you don't have the savvy as a university president to start the answer to that question with, well, first of all, such a call against any group is, goes against everything we believe, everything any institution of higher education believes. Now, free speech alone is protected, but it very quickly can become harassment or assault or vandalism and whatever, and we take those concerns very seriously. Something like that, if you really want to be legally nuanced, although that's not really what the moment was called for, because a public hearing is very different. And so these presidents came off as tone deaf and bureaucratic and robotic,
yes,
rather than displaying the sort of leadership and moral clarity that was called for.
I've talked to you about this, and we've definitely talked here on this program a lot about the fact that contemptible speech is free speech. In fact, it's kind of by design. It's the most unpopular speech deserves protection under the First Amendment. But when she asks things about like the code of conduct, the basically, if a university is enforcing the way that students should behave on campus at all, should it preclude students from, having rallies where they call for the genocide of their peers?
Right, particularly if those rallies are in front of the Hillel, the Center for Jewish Life, or if they're impeding Jewish students trying to get from one place to another. Or if they're disrupting classes or speakers or other events. There are all sorts of rules and regulations that are perfectly appropriate to enforce without violating the First Amendment.
Now, we did see, again, one university president who was in that hearing resign. There's pressure on the other university presidents to follow suit at both MIT and Harvard, and there's a new wrinkle in the Harvard story in the last 24 hours. The president of Harvard University is now accused of extensive plagiarism in her dissertation back from 1997. Her name is Claudine Gay, and boy, there sure looks like a lot of evidence that she did actually plagiarize a massive amount of material, so that adds to the pressure here. Do you think, is it your view that they should step down from these jobs?
I think so. I mean, they showed themselves not to be up to the moment of preserving the reputation of their institutions, which have taken just tremendous shocks, and alumni and donors are shutting their their wallets. Congress and the state attorneys general are investigating further. I mean, they did the opposite of what they needed to accomplish in the moment, and have shown, I don't know how they can maintain the confidence of the board, which in Claudine Gay's case, the Harvard president, they may use this plagiarism and other academic integrity violations as an excuse so they don't have to pronounce on these thornier political controversies and be, that would show themselves to be spineless cowards as well. But that's kind of par for the course. MIT has an interesting wrinkle in that there were proven violations of MIT policy in terms of blocking access to buildings and otherwise violating things that have nothing to do with speech. But MIT refrained from disciplining the students because a lot of them were foreigners on student visas. And if they were disciplined in that way, that would jeopardize their visas. So in effect, at MIT, if you're a foreign student, you have more rights to disrupt and harass and intimidate than an American citizen student. So lots of weird things going on at universities. And getting rid of these weak leaders is a necessary but certainly not sufficient condition for reforming our higher ed institutions.
Yeah, and I saw another piece over at Yale, in case you were wondering whether or not this is all steeped in anti-Semitism. There was an attempt, there was a menorah near campus over the weekend at Yale University that was covered with a Palestinian flag was placed over it. Of course, we're in the midst of Hanukkah, and they're desecrating a menorah with an anti-Israel symbol. It kind of tells you the whole story, doesn't it, Ilya Shapiro?
Oh yeah, we're just opposed to Israel. That's why we're opposed to the practice of Judaism in any aspect of it. It's completely facetious, and it's amazing. A lot of people in the last 2 months have seen the scales fall from their eyes, and the lesson to draw from this is not that we need to incorporate Jews in the latest intersectional hierarchy of underprivileged minorities or what have you, or that we need to impose stricter speech codes so that the range of permissible expression is even narrower. That's the opposite thing. What you have to do is apply the rules that are already there and the policies that are already there equally to everyone,
yes.
Which these institutions certainly have not been. On October 6th, there were still students and faculty under investigation in different places for microaggressions and triggering moments and all of this, using the wrong pronouns and things like this. A far cry from calling for genocide or harassing fellow students.
Well, the other piece is that it seems to me that these institutions, in fact, I'm confident when I say this, that they've been churning out hateful bigotry over the course of time. And that includes towards Jews, that includes towards biological women, that includes towards white men, that includes towards Christians. These are all categories of people who've been subjected to hateful rhetoric and propaganda inside of these institutions, Ilya Shapiro. It is interesting to see people, especially donors, claim that they now have the scales falling from their eyes over all of this. But shouldn't they have seen this a long time ago when they were funding all of this propaganda?
Well, better late than never is all I can say. I'm trying to be gracious and say, welcome to the party. It's, if this is what it took for a lot of people to recognize the rot in academia, well, better late than never. I don't know whether higher ed can be saved or whether the reputations of the so-called elite schools, and I went to them for college. Where I went to law school, University of Chicago has been a great exception, the exemplar of how you deal with these issues. But nevertheless, it looks like we're in the midst of a fundamental shakeup of this industry.
Right, and in other words, something good could come of all of this, especially as it relates to, being more tolerant of speech on these campuses, which they haven't been in the past, and maybe they can, get back to educating people in the basics instead of
That's
all
right.
of these.
More being more aware of these illiberal ideologies that subvert the traditional missions of universities of open inquiry and academic freedom and due process and all of these classical liberal values that, in the 60s, the Berkeley's hippies were demanding.
How much power do the students have in these conversations? Because it seems like they have a lot more than some of the professors even.
There are different stakeholders as the terminology goes, especially in the academic world. But I think a lot of the change has to be driven by external shocks from employers and politicians and alumni and donors, and that's what we're seeing. I don't think you're going to see change just by one group of students debating another group of students, because fundamentally we've seen a growth in bureaucracies and non-teaching staffs, and then the presidents and provosts and deans, the administrators, kowtow to those bureaucrats, especially in these DEI offices, and the radical activists that are really loud, where most students, most faculty try to keep their head down and not be canceled.
All right, Ilya Shapiro, as always, thank you for your insight on these important issues. There's a lot going on in the country. You've been subjected to some of this on these college campuses, so you have a firsthand experience. Thank you very much for your insight today, sir.